All right, we are officially off to the races. That is Veritiv celebrating the opening bell here at the New York Stock Exchange. And as we look to round out the week with the final trading day here on Friday, I do want to bring in a markets guest, Youngyu Ma, Chief Investment Officer at BMO Wealth Management. Youngyu, great to have you on the show today. Stocks still near record highs. What do investors and our viewers need to know?
Yeah, thanks, Kristen. It's great to be here. Stocks are still near record highs, but I think there's an element of caution and an air of caution that's kind of sitting on the markets here, given the amount of uncertainty regarding different policy initiatives relating to tariffs and also what's happening in the interest rate markets, both on the short end of the curve and for long-term rates. So I think some of the enthusiasm from the initial election results has worn off in the equity markets, and we're probably seeing a bit of caution here to see how things play out going forward.
Interesting. So we did get a wave of economic data this week, Youngyu, and that does seem to be back in focus, of course, after we got those election results and traders and long-term investors repositioned. But inflation ticking up a little bit in October and a stronger than expected retail sales report this morning. What's your view on the economy and how that could impact earnings growth?
Yeah, the underlying fundamentals we still see as solid for the economy. Yes, the labor market is softening a little bit at the margins, but we think that's going to stabilize as well. But when we see inflation, the downward trajectory almost just leveling off here and not continuing on the path it had been on in the prior quarters, we think there is some stickiness here to inflation. That's what's giving the Fed some pause and sending signals out that perhaps the rate cutting environment going forward into 2025 isn't going to be on such a downward trajectory the way it was for the past few months. So I think that's also setting some adjustments in terms of how people are thinking about the environment going forward. But the economy itself, the fundamentals are strong. Consumers are in a good spot here. The savings rate is high. Spending is healthy. And business spending is healthy as well, and probably helped a little bit by the lower interest rates. So overall, we see the economy as stable, but still some big question marks out there.
Youngyu, as a Chief Investment Officer, what are you advising your clients in the wake of those election results?
Well, there are some areas that we continue to like. We've liked for some time, and one of them, the company ringing the opening bell, plays right into, which is U.S. infrastructure. There are a lot of drivers in that space, whether it's data centers, enhancements to the electricity grid, onshoring, international companies moving to the U.S. and expanding here in the U.S. That's an area that we think is going to continue to do well for quite some time. A lot of money is flowing into that area. So we want to continue to lean into that. And we do think overall the bias in the equity markets is going to be positive in the U.S. equity markets this year. So we want to lean into that, but also advising them that it's probably going to be a much choppier path this year than it's been in the past year. We're probably going to see more volatility along the way, more policy uncertainty, headline risk. And we got to be prepared for a little bit more bumps and pullbacks along the way that we still think is a healthy environment, though.
Youngyu, I do want to get your take on cryptocurrency because we've just simply been talking about it a lot more these past few weeks. Happened at the start of the year with the SEC approving the first Bitcoin ETF. We know people can invest in Bitcoin in their 401k, and certainly it has been on a tear in the wake of the election. Is that something that is looking perhaps more attractive to you as a Chief Investment Officer?
Well, we do think the tailwinds for Bitcoin are probably still in place here for a while to come. The administration's more supportive. The coming administration is more supportive than the current administration in terms of the regulatory environment and what might allow that to thrive a bit more. And there's a lot of demand out there. There's demand both from the retail sector and also demand from the institutional sector. And so I think that provides a positive tailwind. We do think it remains a very risky and speculative asset. It's not something we think is appropriate in all client portfolios, but it is something that probably still has some tailwinds behind it, even though it's had a big run up and a lot of momentum here.
I want to talk to you about the comments that we got from Fed Chair Jerome Powell yesterday. We hear from him in very decisive moments, and as we saw, that inflation data show that inflation might be sticking around these levels. How do you think that's going to impact Fed policy going forward?
Well, we think that the Fed is probably still on track to cut rates next month. We think it doesn't want to let any softness in the labor market start to gather momentum. But after that, we think the Fed's going to step back and really take a view of what's happening in the economy, what's happening in fiscal policy, and probably not be as eager to continue cutting rates in 2025. We still think we'll get a couple of rate cuts in 2025, but the idea that the Fed funds rate is going to come down to 3% next year, we think is quite a stretch. And just a couple of months ago, that's probably around where the market was pricing. And right now, the market has really priced a few of those rate cuts out and really looking at a much more cautious or circumspect path by the Fed going forward here.
Youngyu Ma, great to have you on the show and get your insight. Youngyu's the Chief Investment Officer at BMO Wealth Management.